Okay, well, I think we can perhaps make a start. No doubt there'll be a few people joining us as we go through. But good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us at today's lunchtime webinar. We're really pleased to be joined by Roythornes Solicitors today for this webinar titled Sheep Worrying by Dogs, Where Do You Stand? You know, this is a topic, it's a hot topic, it's one that we are dealing with at NSA sometimes on a day-to-day basis, but it never gets less devastating for both the livestock obviously and the farmers involved. So it's going to be really useful today to pass on some information from Rebecca and Tim from Roythornes, which will hopefully give you some useful advice. Just to introduce you to our speakers then today. So firstly, we've got Rebecca Ironmonger. Rebecca qualified as a solicitor in September 2020 and works as a dispute resolution solicitor with a focus on the food sector. Farmers and organisations involved in livestock breeding and food production come up against a number of challenges that are unique to their sector. As a beef and dairy farmer's daughter herself, Rebecca in particular has an in-depth knowledge for those sectors. Rebecca advises in respect of any regulatory enforcement action by Food Standards Agency, DEFRA, trading standards and local councils. She regularly assists with criminal investigations, and in addition to this, she's involved in challenging the decision-making of both the FSA and DEFRA in civil proceedings, such as appealing against the service of inappropriate enforcement notices or bringing claims for judicial review where it's considered these departments have acted unlawfully, for example, in respect of charges levied against a business for the supply of FSA staff. And then we have Tim Russ, also from Roythornes. Tim is a senior dispute resolution lawyer specialising in agricultural law, food law, private client and property disputes. He advises on agricultural tenancies, landlord and tenant disputes, property disputes, partnership disputes, professional negligence claims, direct payments, quota disputes and contractual claims. Tim has handled a number of judicial reviews, especially for food businesses against the FSA and DEFRA. He's a particular interest in animal disease issues and has dealt with many of the leading cases concerning with both TB and foot and mouth disease. He's also acted in a number of leading cases concerning the licensing and regulation of meat businesses. Tim is a member of a number of agricultural organisations such as the Agricultural Law Association, the Worshipful Company of Farmers, the Farmers Club, NFU, the Country Land and Business Association, Tenant Farmers Association and Countryside Alliance. In 2020, Tim was appointed to the Agricultural Law Association Dispute Resolution Panel, and in 2022, this year, he was awarded the Associateship of the Royal Agricultural Societies. So, you know, they're very well qualified and experienced, you know, and Tim himself said, you know, they're very used to taking many phone calls, unfortunately, though, to do with sheep worrying. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Rebecca. There will be time for questions at the end of this webinar. If you could please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat, we can just keep a track of those questions a little easier, and I'll make sure those get asked for you at the end of the session. We are recording this webinar, so you will be able to watch this back again on the NSA website. Or share it with anybody that you think this would be useful for. Today's webinar will focus very much on the law in England and Wales to do with sheep worrying. I think Rebecca will mention how it sort of does differ slightly in Scotland, but you know, I really hope you enjoy this session, and I'm going to hand over to Rebecca, who will take over from here.
Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you everyone for joining today. The way this is going to work today is I'm going to go through what the law stands at the moment, the criminal aspects of sheep worrying. Then I'm going to pass over to Tim, who's going to talk about the civil aspects of sheep worrying and what you can do in a civil context. And then we're going to have a little look at what the prospective changes of the law are going to be in the future. And then it will be time for questions. So, what is the law which applies to livestock worrying? So the act that governs this is currently the Dogs Protection of Livestock Act 1953, and section 1 of that act basically contains the core offence, which is an owner or the person in charge of a dog which worries livestock commits a criminal offence. Now, that offence can be split down into several smaller sections. So for a start, we've got worrying livestock. Worrying livestock means attacking livestock. It means chasing livestock in such a way which could reasonably cause to the animal injury, suffering, abortion, or loss or reduction in the animal's produce, for example, milk with cows. And 3, it can also mean being at large in a field or an enclosure where there are sheep, i.e. not being on a lead or under close control. And I suspect that particular part of the worrying livestock definition will ring bells with everybody on the webinar today. Livestock includes sheep, of course. It doesn't include at the moment things like llamas, but I will talk later about what's going to happen with the law in the future. An important part of the offence is that it has to occur on agricultural land. And agricultural land means, under this particular act, because of course agricultural land can mean different things in different contexts, but in this context it means arable, meadow or grazing land, or land used for the purpose of poultry farming, pig farming, market gardens, allotments, nursery grounds and orchards. I understand there was a particular query about common land. Common land, as long as you've got a right to graze your sheep on that land, then it should be covered by this particular offence. So generally, there will be a right for you to challenge somebody who has been in control of a dog or out of control of a dog on your land, or on land that you are grazing your sheep on, if they are worrying your livestock. In terms of common land, I'll just say now that I would suggest speaking to the owner of the common land to try and see if there's any way that they can ban people with dogs on the land. But if you've tried that, or if you don't know who the landowner is, or you're having any issues with that, please do get in touch. So, can you legally shoot a dog which has been worrying your livestock? The essential answer is yes, but only where 1, the dog is an immediate danger to your livestock, and 2, there is no other reasonable option. In terms of other reasonable options, there will generally be another reasonable option than shooting the animal, because there are so many other considerations you have to take into account if this is an action that you're considering. First, you've got the Animal Welfare Act. So even if you are legally allowed to shoot the dog, because of the circumstances, it's immediate danger to your livestock, there's no other reasonable option. If you don't shoot that animal accurately and it suffers, then you could come under scrutiny under the Animal Welfare Act. And if you've shot somebody's dog, it's likely they're going to be angry. And so they are likely to press for any charges to be brought by the police, by the Crown Prosecution Service for animal welfare offences. So please be very careful of that. As well, you've also got to consider that why is that dog on your land? Likely it's because it's been walked by somebody and they've lost control of it, and that person could still be in the vicinity. And so you need to also think about health and safety, and whether you're shooting that dog is going to cause potential injury to any other person that's on the land. Going back to the common land, if someone's got a right to walk on that land and there isn't a specific public footpath across that land, then you also need to make sure that you're checking to see that there's nobody around in the area. You also need to ensure you're acting within the conditions of your shotgun or firearms license when it comes to shooting a dog. So next, what are the penalties for breaching the law? So it is a criminal offence for somebody to allow their dog to worry livestock on your land, or land that you've got a right to graze your sheep over. They can be prosecuted for that criminal offence. The penalty for this particular offence is, however, very low. So in England and Wales, the maximum fine for anybody who's prosecuted and convicted of this particular offence is £1,000 plus costs and any compensation order made. And I'm going to talk about compensation orders in a minute. The police do have the power to seize any dog worrying livestock and where it is not clear who is in charge of the dog until the owner is found. But if and when they find the owner of that dog, at the moment, as the law stands, they have to return the dog to the owner. And in some cases, dogs unclaimed will be destroyed, but generally the owners will be found. And at the moment, that is the full extent of the police's powers in terms of seizing that dog if it's not caught by any other dangerous dogs legislation. So compensation orders. When a defendant is found guilty of an offence and loss has been caused to the victim of the crime, the court must consider making a compensation order. Now, a compensation order is an order made by the court upon conviction requiring the defendant to pay the victim a sum of money as compensation for the crime committed. For example, if the defendant's dog has attacked and killed, let's say, 5 of your sheep and caused 5 more of your sheep to miscarry their lambs, the court may make a compensation order in the value of those 5 dead sheep. They can make an order in the expected value of the lambs that were lost had they been born, as well as any vet's bills and costs of removal of dead animals or any other incidental costs that have been caused by the livestock worrying. You need to tell the police that you want compensation to be considered, and you need to provide details of any losses you've suffered to the police. The police officer in charge of your case will then make the application to the court. The earlier you tell the police you want compensation, the better. And it's always a good idea to have a good detailed list as early as possible of any costs that you've been that you've had to make and any losses that you've suffered. It's important to have those as early as possible, because if the police know that you want to make a compensation order and things move quite quickly, then they will know as early as possible. Of course, such an order is only made or is only paid by the defendant if they have the means to pay. So if they've got very little money, not only will they be given most likely a fine that's lower than that £1,000 maximum fine, but they may also not have a compensation order made against them, or if they do, it may take them a very long time to pay if they pay at all. So what, if anything, can you do if the police or the Crown Prosecution Service do not prosecute the offender? Now, this generally happens because there isn't enough evidence for a prosecution to be made, either whether that's the dog was worrying at all or who owns the dog, who was in charge of the dog. So your options are limited if the police or the Crown Prosecution don't prosecute the offender in terms of the criminal courts. Tim will talk in a moment about the civil possibilities. One of the things you could do is a private prosecution. However, these are very complex and very expensive, so I would not recommend going down that route unless you've got a raft of evidence and you've got some very detailed legal advice to go for that option. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the criminal aspects of livestock worrying, and I'm going to now pass you over to Tim to talk about what you can do in a civil context. Over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. So my view of this is coloured by practicing civil law for a very long time, over 30 years, but also for the last 15, 16 years, I've been a deputy district judge. So I sit 2 or 3 days a month in the county court, and all of the claims that you might bring for dog attacks on sheep would be generally heard in the county court. So I can give you a bit of a practical perspective of how judges would go about dealing with this. If a dog attacks your sheep, the person who is responsible for it and who should have it in control is likely to be liable either for common law negligence or by virtue of the Animals Act Section 2(2), where there is a slightly interesting argument about whether you can only pursue a claim if this is the second time the dog has done that. But most of these claims are pursued in negligence, and negligence applies where a duty of care is owed which is breached, and it's not difficult for a district judge to find that a dog should be being controlled by its owner when on private land where there are livestock around, which is where signage comes in as alerting people to the fact there may be livestock around. It should be fairly obvious to anyone walking that there are sheep there. But there we are. So if you pursue a claim, you'll be pursuing a claim for damage. Your claim is likely to be less than £10,000. And that is the small claims track of the county court limit, which effectively means once you've issued proceedings, you pay your court fee to the Ministry of Justice, the proceedings are issued, you know who the person is, presumably because you've either interacted with them and got their details, or the police have done so and got their details, and you're not pursuing a compensation order in the magistrate's court, or the police or the CPS between them are not going to pursue this. So your fee will be generally 5% of your claim to pay to the Ministry of Justice. So that's not payable to a solicitor. And getting solicitors involved in the small claims track of the county court is problematic because they can't get their costs back if they're successful, save for a couple of £100. So it's not economic to pay a solicitor their full charging rate. Even at the fairly lowest level of the solicitor's practice, there'll be far more than you'll get back. So unless you are wanting to subsidise your solicitor's practice, you can go along and deal with it yourself. Judges are quite used to people turning up on their own to the small claims track to a trial. It's quite informal. And the procedures, basically, the case comes into court, the other side will file a defence if they want to defend it, saying my dog was perfectly under control, or some other good reason why they think they can get away with the offence which has happened. Or they may be simply challenging the damages rather than the fact the incident didn't take place. And a small claims track trial will take place. These used to be, over the last couple of years, on video, but they're now being more and more held in court. You'll issue proceedings in the County Court Money Claims Centre, which is in the northwest of England, and the case will then be transferred to your local court for it to be determined by a district judge. Now, in terms of some practical advice from the judges as opposed to the solicitor's perspective, COVID has caused chaos with the Ministry of Justice, and during 2010 and 2021, most of what I was doing was domestic violence because that was prioritised. So all the civil works got behind, and there will be a massive period of time. At the moment in Peterborough, which is one of our local courts, they're taking 100 days to issue an order from the date that the judge decides something. And then, of course, that's only the first stage of a process. So there are huge delays in the court system. So whilst there may be problems in persuading the CPS to prosecute somebody, there also may be practical problems in terms of getting your case from start to finish and getting your judgment. Now, of course, once you get a judgment, you go to your small claims track trial. The judge accepts that the attack took place, that you've suffered the loss, you proved the loss by some evidence, such as a letter from a land agent's firm showing what the livestock were likely to be worth, or however you've chosen to prove it, you get a judgment. The court doesn't do anything about that. It's down to you to enforce it. So you've then got to go and find out whether the other side have got any money, and if so, how you go about enforcing it. There are things you can do. You can get the bailiffs to go around. You can get, if it's more than £750, you can apply to bankrupt the person concerned. But you're still on a further journey of adventure trying to get the money out of them if they won't pay. The one thing that may assist you in this process is having legal expenses insurance. most NFU mutual policies have got insurance on it. It's with a company called DAS. They're not particularly fun to work for from the solicitor's perspective, but the customer's not too concerned with that. What they sometimes do, particularly if the losses are relatively small, is the insurer actually says, to save us having to employ a lawyer to run this case for you, here's some money to stop you having to run the case at all. And they pay that to you, and it all goes away. So look, if there's one thing I would say to you about if you can afford it, and these policies are fairly inexpensive, they'll be tens of pounds rather than thousands of pounds, is to get yourself a legal expenses insurance policy and cover yourself for civil claims. So in summary, just to tie up there, you're likely to be in the small claims track of the county court, because it will be a very interesting dog attack to be worth more than £10,000. The procedure is very informal. You can deal with it yourself. Judges are used to it. They try and help you through it. It's very unusual for the defendants to be legally represented. You get a judgment. Once you've got the judgment, you then got to enforce it, and the court will help you as to what the best way of enforcing it is. Most people in that situation will want to get rid of that judgment if they've got any sort of money at all. But you could be faced with a person who owns a dog but hasn't got any money, but persuades the judge to pay you at £5 a month, and your judgment is going on for years being satisfied. That's something to think about before you even approach the court in the first place. So injunctions are only really worthwhile if you've got consistent and regular dog attacks coming from the same person. You're going to spend, if you go to a solicitor, between £3,000 and £5,000 to get an injunction. So it's a very expensive procedure. And if you're going to consider it, you've either got to have the money to do it and be really concerned about a very long-term problem that's causing consistent and repeated incidents, or have some legal expenses insurance, and they'll pay for it for you. Next one. I've already mentioned the problem about costs. I've mentioned the problem about legal expenses insurance cover. If you're an NFU member and you're a member of the NFU Legal Assistance Scheme, they may help you with the legal costs, but you'd have to talk to your group secretary or the LAS through their Call First service, where they won't refer you to Roythornes because we're not a panel solicitor. But the panel solicitors that we know really well in most areas, and they're obviously chosen to be agricultural lawyers. The next. Back to you, Rebecca, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. So I'm just going to go through a few of the changes that are likely to come in with the new Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill. It's currently going through Parliament at the moment. It's about to enter the report stage in the Commons, so it's still got quite a long way to go before it receives royal assent. It is a government bill, so there's a good chance, as long as this current government doesn't end up going to another election, this is looking like it will hopefully go through. So the main changes to the law, now this is the changes to the law in England and Wales primarily. It actually, I think, brings England and Wales a little bit more into line with Scotland, because the laws in Scotland are a little bit more extensive, although they're based in the same act. So this bill will extend the application to additional species. I mentioned earlier about llamas, for instance. It's going to extend to llamas, to emus, to enclosed deer or donkeys. So if you have other animals on your farm as well as sheep, it will extend to those when it comes in. It also is going to extend the application to paths and roads in circumstances where the livestock have not strayed onto that road, in addition to agricultural land. So for example, if you've got, let's say, a farm track on your land, and that farm track isn't used for anything other than taking your animals from A to B, it wouldn't be classed as agricultural land under this act at the moment, under the Dogs Protection of Livestock Act. So if you're livestock were worried on that track at the moment, and they're allowed to be on that track, and it's an enclosed track that's not that doesn't open up onto the field, it's not like in the field, then you wouldn't have any recourse in the criminal law for that. Whereas when the new law comes in, it would apply to those tracks and paths on your farm that are not currently classed as agricultural land. Just an aside on agricultural land and the way it applies at the moment and the way it's going to continue to apply is if your sheep are trespassing on another person's land or currently on a road, then you can't do anything in terms of livestock worrying in the criminal context, because your livestock don't have a right to be on that land. So, for example, if your sheep had escaped, as sheep are likely to do, you wouldn't be able to do anything in a criminal context for livestock worrying if they were worried on somebody else's field rather than on your own. So this new act is also going to bring in increased powers for the police to seize, detain and destroy dogs who are found worrying livestock. I mentioned earlier that at the moment the police only have a power to detain a dog until an owner is found. So the new powers for the police would help in destroying dogs that are repeatedly worrying livestock. As we all know, when a dog's done it once, it's likely to do it again because they do enjoy chasing sheep. And so if that dog that has done it more than once can be destroyed by the police under this new act, then that will help to prevent the problem going forward in the context of that particular dog. This new bill also brings in something that's very important, which is a power for the police to take samples and impressions to be used to assist investigations and to be used as evidence in any prosecution. I mentioned earlier that one of the major reasons why prosecutions either never come to court or fail is because of the lack of evidence. And this bill will allow the police to do more in terms of investigating than they currently have power to do. Now, that's not to say that you don't have a power as a victim of an offence to take samples from your own worried livestock and to have post-mortem inspections done on any sheep that have been attacked and sadly died because of the attack. As much evidence as you can possibly gather yourself and pass that evidence on to the police will help, because the police are, of course, very busy, and many of them, when there isn't enough evidence initially, will decide that this isn't something that they want to look into because they have many other things to look at. If you've got lots of evidence yourself, then that will assist now, but these new powers will hopefully help with bringing more prosecutions and successful prosecutions in the future. This bill also modifies police powers of entry onto premises to identify or seize dogs. So at the moment, they're not allowed to enter just any property to identify or seize dogs, whereas they're going to be able to with this new bill. It also provides new orders for the court that they can make upon conviction of an offender, including dog control, disqualification from owning dogs and destruction orders. So at the moment, the courts, all they've got, as I said earlier, was fine, compensation order and costs, whereas with this new bill they will be allowed to order an offender to have particular controls for their dogs. They will be able to disqualify a person, a completely inconsiderate owner, from owning dogs in the future, and they will also be able to apply a destruction order to the dog that has done the worrying. So there's a lot of good things, I think, in this new bill that's going to hopefully be passed in the future, but it's not quite there yet. So just to wrap up before we start to take some questions, there are 5 key things that you should do if you are a victim of livestock worrying, and indeed before you become a victim of livestock worrying. Shore up any existing measures to protect your flock. Prevention is always better than a cure, which goes without saying. In particular, as Tim mentioned earlier, it's usually because someone has lost control of their dog. And signage, very important. The vast majority of dog owners are responsible, but sometimes they may lose control of their dog or be totally inconsiderate and not understand farming and livestock and not realise that you should keep your dog on a lead around animals. And so any signage that you've got on your gates, on any entrances to any footpaths that go across your field, will just warn any ignorant dog owners of what they should be doing on your land. Where worrying has happened, call the police. Also, as I mentioned earlier, gather your own evidence. Don't rely on the police to do this. Only if you have any photographs, if you have any CCTV footage, if you have any reports from your vet who's come out to look at either the dead animals or any animals that have lost their lambs or are injured in any other way. Collate those and provide those to the police, and make sure you keep a copy yourself. One thing I recommend to all of my clients who have any issue is to write everything you can remember down, everything you saw, everything you heard, everything that you know about that field, about your animals, about the footpaths going across it. Just write it all down. Sign and date your account on as soon as possible after the incident has happened, and then you've got what's called a contemporaneous note of it, and that will be very important for both for your memory if it comes to prosecution in the future, and it's also just good evidence from the time. Do keep a careful note of any financial losses that you've sustained, and those can be used both in the criminal courts for a compensation order and for any civil claim that, as Tim talked about earlier. And get any legal advice. You can call us via the National Sheep Association legal helpline, or as Tim mentioned, you've got the NFU legal assist and your legal expenses insurer. And so now I think we are ready to take any questions.
I think we got some at the bottom by the look of it in the chat and the Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah, so the first question to come in was talking about a case that was resolved entirely with the police. They believe it was called a private civil claim. They had witnesses for damage that involved killing one ewe. The cost of those damages were estimated, and the police took that claim to the defendant, and they paid the damages in 2 instalments by agreement. Is that something you've
well, that's simply what I would call good policing, which is the police avoiding the cost to the taxpayer of the CPS becoming involved and saying to the person whose dog is involved, perhaps you might like to make some compensation, and then they won't pursue this as a prosecution. It isn't a formal procedure. There's no actual procedure called a private civil claim. It's just a police officer being very sensible, in my view, and effectively by negotiation sorting the matter out. So it's very much to be encouraged. Whether that happens depends on which police officer you've got and which force is and what their policy is, I think. Do you have anything to add to that, Rebecca?
No, I think that covers it.
Can you use vet statements in court? In a civil court, you can produce anything you like, really, because the rules of evidence are pretty relaxed, really. The strength that a judge puts in it will be down to the judge. In criminal, there's a lot more rules about it. So,
yes, you can, if you hand them to the police, that will form part of the prosecution materials, and so whether they decide to rely on that evidence or get their own, the prosecution might get their own veterinary expert to look at any reports that have been produced, or they might use the same vet to produce a additional report that complies with the rules in court. But it could also appear on what's called the schedule of unused material if it isn't used in court. So it would still be there, but there, as Tim says, there are a considerable number of rules that are required in the criminal courts, but it's just another thing that could tip the prosecution towards prosecuting over not prosecuting if that vet report shows what you say it does, if it shows that the damage has been caused by a dog.
Okay, we got another one here. If an offender repeatedly allows their dog to roam loose and worry livestock on a daily basis who has just been given a suspended jail sentence, should he not be arrested and sent to prison for committing criminal offence? Is definitely one in your area, Rebecca.
I think the simple answer is probably yes. If he has been committing a criminal offence for worrying livestock, then yes, he probably should be arrested. Whether he's sent to prison or not, that depends on what the suspension of his suspended jail sentence, actually what the terms are. But essentially he should be arrested, and the police and the Crown Prosecution Service should look into it.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Is there an offence of failing to provide details upon request, Rebecca? You're getting most of the workload today. I'm sorry, but there we are. Failing to provide details upon request, I don't believe there is in this particular context, but all dogs do need to be microchipped, I believe now. So if the police do not know who the owner of that dog is, and someone is refusing to provide the information that they own the dog, they're refusing to confirm that they own the dog, then potentially when that dog is next out of a premise, if it's out roaming, the police may be able to seize it at that point to identify the owner, perhaps by the microchip. But other than that, I'm afraid as the law currently stands, I don't believe there is an offence for failing to provide details upon request, but we can look into it. Okay. What's a reasonable time for the police to get in touch after the attack? As we had an attack on 1st October, I had to deal online 3.5 weeks after they actually got into contact. The owner of the dog had to send the dog to an animal shelter. We don't know where the dog is. Well, this is all very much in the politics of the moment, isn't it? Where people are complaining about burglaries and nothing being done about them, and the Met starting to actually send people to burglaries. It's the same point, really. It's about good policing and how you conduct good policing and why they're not doing it in some force areas.
It sounds like a complaint to the police if nothing's heard from for a while. There's always your police and crime commissioner as well.
Yeah. Have we exhausted everybody?
Yeah, those are the questions that we've had in so far. Did anybody have anything further? I think we've got, something else has just come in. Some people are raising hands. If you're able to use the Q&A function, that would be a lot easier for us if possible.
Would you advise farmers against publishing threats to shoot any dog on their land on social media? I would advise them to do that because you're likely to get the firearms officer around and seizing your guns if you look a bit dodgy with weapons, and your guns are probably better in your cabinet than being in the police station being locked up with your license under threat. So I wouldn't do anything that looks like you aren't a sensible person to have a firearm or shotgun. Anything to add to that, Rebecca?
No, I would say don't threaten to shoot any dogs on your land. For a start, threatening to shoot any dog on your land isn't quite accurate anyway, because you can't shoot any dog on your land. It's only if they are an immediate threat to your animals. If that dog has already left the vicinity of your sheep, you can't shoot them legally anyway. So it's, and as Tim says, it's not it's not going to be very helpful, I don't think, in terms of preventing worrying on your land. You'd be better putting on your signage saying keep your dog on a lead something like, I'm legally allowed to shoot any dog that is an immediate threat to my livestock and I have no other reasonable option. Something like that would be better than putting a threat on social media.
The next one I think is to be answered by the NSA, really, isn't it?
Yeah, so somebody has asked, and they've said that they've lost 5 sheep in a recent attack, and the incident was resolved with compensation privately, but it was reported to the police. Do the NSA have access to all reported incidents to the police? We don't. Well, we can view the Freedom of Information FOI reports are issued each year, which give the data on which regional police forces, the number of cases they've had reported to them. But that's about as much as we can see, and we know they aren't necessarily a very accurate figure relating to how many attacks might have happened. I think the thing is, a lot of people will ring the police, and if you don't get a criminal reference number, I think it's called, then it doesn't actually get formally listed and reported. So the really key thing to do when you ring the police is to actually get that reference number and keep it safe, and then you know that it has actually gone down in the official records. But we do release the information that we get each spring when we do our sheep worrying by dog survey. So some information on that would be available on our website, and I will pop the link to our sheep worrying page on the chat shortly, so you can access that if you'd like to. Somebody then has just commented that they've got some problems with their internet. This is being recorded, this session here, so all that information that Rebecca and Tim have given us will be available on our website. Again, I can pop it in our chat, but it's nationalsheep.org.uk/webinars, and that's where you'll find our recordings, and I'd imagine it will probably be up there from late this afternoon by the time one of my colleagues has had a chance to edit and get it listed for us.
And we got a request for what sign can you put up on a public bridleway, because right-of-way rules mean dogs can run free on bridleways. I think a landowner is perfectly entitled to put up a request sign saying, please keep your dog on a lead. I don't see anything wrong with that at all. It's an order type of sign that I think is the one that they're talking about. So I'm not sure what because the NFU dish out these signs free of charge, don't they, Rebecca?
Yeah, we've got a couple on back on our family farm. We've got a couple of those. Please keep your dog on a lead.
Yeah, NSA produces some signs as well. We've got a couple of different types there. They are free to NSA members, but we will give out a couple to others that ask as well. And yeah, it's very much our latest signs kind of try to go down the viewpoint of, be a responsible dog owner. But we also have one which is a bit more sort of hard hitting, really, kind of pointing out that sheep worrying is caused by dogs, not just actually physically getting hold of the dog, the sheep, and causing injury. There, highlighting the fact that just their presence can be a worry to the animal, and that's quite a popular one. It's quite a red, hard-hitting one. So again, available on our website, or do get in touch with the NSA, and we can provide you with some of those to help out.
Next one's yours, I think, Rebecca.
Yeah, can DNA be used? As Tim said earlier, any evidence can be brought in a civil context. So if you're wanting to sue somebody, then you can bring that in if you had an expert done all the analysis. DNA in terms of a prosecution, as the police don't currently have powers to take samples and to do DNA analysis, it would have to again be something that you'd had someone do privately, and all those rules that are required in the criminal courts would have to be complied with in order for any DNA evidence or sampling results, or vet reports to be used. And that's a decision that the Crown Prosecution would take when they'd reviewed all the evidence they had available. But with this new law, when it comes in, potentially DNA may be able to be used at that point, but at the moment it's a little bit more ambiguous.
Okay, so next one we've got the writer says they feel very alone, not enough help from the police. Knowing the dogs are still allowed to roam on our so all our sheep are housed at the moment as our neighbours, and the owners of the dogs just allow them to roam, and has threatened to shoot my neighbour if he shoots his dogs. Well, this is something you should be talking to your police officer about, really, about how they help. Or if you want to sponsor the legal profession, you're into an injunction there, really. But the practical answer is to go and talk to your community police officer who deals with rural crime. Any additions to that, Rebecca?
I'd also say if your police officer is not wanting to do anything or they're too busy, there's also the community protection officers in each area, and you may also be able to speak to your local councillor who'll be able to give the police a kick.
There's a question about signage and common land. I don't see a particular problem with a please do this sort of type of sign on common land any more than freehold land or any sort of land.
Yeah, certainly very close to the NSA head office here in Malvern. We've got quite a lot of common land, and obviously we've got the Malvern Hills just to the side of us, and you know, that includes quite a lot of common land, and yeah, there's quite a lot of signage up there. But actually, the Malvern Hills Conservators who look after that area are very proactive on their signage, and they're very proactive on their social media, which certainly helps.
Should we quickly deal with another question? Was saying if people forcibly remove the signs, is that a criminal offence? Would it be criminal damage? Wouldn't it, Rebecca?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
So if you damage the sign and throw it away, it's clearly criminal damage. And then there's one for you, Rebecca, about the Animal Welfare Act.
Yes. So failing to act. Yes. Your question is about whether not shooting the dog whilst it's worrying sheep could be argued as greater risk to animal suffering under the Animal Welfare Act, as in failure to act. Yes, potentially it could be. And that's something that if you were prosecuted for an animal welfare offence for shooting a dog, then that is one of the things that we would argue would be to not shoot the dog was a greater risk to animal welfare of the sheep. But the sensible approach, which you would take as a farmer and we would take as defence lawyers, is not always the way that the Crown Prosecution Service would see things. And if there is evidence of suffering of the dog, and the evidence of suffering of the sheep is not as clear. So, for example, if the animal was chasing your sheep, but none of the sheep had actually died, or none of them had lost their lambs and no other injuries, but it was very clear that the dog was dying, or took a long time to die, or was dead, then the evidence is a lot clearer for that. And so to the police or to the Crown Prosecution Service, they may not take into account the sheep if there's not as much evidence for that. So it's something that would be argued, but generally I would say shooting a dog should always be the last resort. If you've got any other option, you should take that instead.
Okay, we've got a question about the right of people to bring dogs onto your land on public rights of way. Of course, there's various different sorts of public rights of way, but the general point is you can walk with a domestic dog on a right of way because it's a highway. Anything to add to that, Rebecca?
In some areas, there are some protection orders. I think it's public space protection orders that councils will put in place.
Yes, that's correct.
For lands that they either that's common land or for for highways and things. So there could be public space protection orders that prevent people from taking their dogs off a lead on those areas. In terms of your land, yeah, they've got a right to have a dog with them on your land.
Okay, we've got a question. If a sheep aborts its lambs, you may not know the losses till the spring. How do you deal with this? Well, if it's a civil claim, Rebecca can deal with the point about a compensation order in the magistrate's court. But if it's a civil claim, you as the claimant have to prove your loss. So you have to know what the loss is. So you won't be able to do that until you've got through to lambing time, simply on the basis that you won't be able to know quite what to claim for. You can put in a claim beforehand in the court papers saying, I've lost 1 or 2 lambs, but I don't know until later. But the best way of dealing with it is to know your losses before you commence the proceedings. And obviously you only get one chance to prove your case, so you've got to get it right, really. In the compensation case in the magistrate's court, Rebecca, I assume it's very similar. You've got to
Yeah, very similar. Yeah. Yeah, they won't make a compensation order unless you've proven your losses. But at that initial stage, when you're telling the police, you can say you've lost some lambs. You don't know the full extent of your loss yet, but you can always give it estimated figures and then update those later on, because the criminal courts do take a long time. So the chances are, by the time you get to a sentencing hearing for the offender, you'll most likely know your losses by then, because it does take many, many months from start to finish.
Okay, I understand the courts are not keen to destroy healthy dogs as an initial resolution. Have you found this to be so? Well, that would be the magistrate's court rather than the criminal court, or the civil court. So, Rebecca.
At the moment, there, in terms of the dog worrying, there isn't a power for the courts to order for dogs to be destroyed. I think there is a power in Scotland, but I don't deal with anything in Scotland, so I can't advise on that particular point for Scotland. But there are, of course, other regimes for dogs, but those generally wouldn't apply to dog worrying. So at the moment, no, there isn't a power for dogs to be destroyed under this particular act.
So next we've got a question about the rights of hunts on for a hunt on private land without consent. So if a hunt is on your land with its hounds, it will only be there because either it's got a right to hunt acquired over time, which is quite rare, or it's supposedly there with the permission of the landowner. And the master of the hunt in the olden days, and to an extent happens today, is supposed to know the landowners and go and see them and make sure that they know what's going on. In fact, that doesn't necessarily always happen. So if they're not there with consent, they're committing a trespass. And obviously, if they are hunting, that's a criminal offence, unless they're doing it within the exceptions to the Hunting Act, as in the schedule to the Hunting Act. Is that enough, Miss? I think that's probably enough for that one.
Yeah, I think generally there are still kind of comments that people won't be able to see, but others, you know, sort of saying, somebody reporting on an incident they had where they tried to intervene when the dog was attacking their dog, grabbed it, then attacked that person. And he said the dog then was killed, but not by shooting. He's reported to this police, was informed it wasn't a police matter, but refused to accept. The person here reporting this refused to accept this. And took the dog to get its microchip bred, but was never informed who the owner was, other than she had some issues of her own. Yeah, so it sounds as though, yeah, I don't know, that's sort of again a police matter, I would imagine, Rebecca or Tim. Yeah.
Yes. I think we're basically coming to the end of this, aren't we?
I think so. Yeah, we're getting lots of sort of comments of people, you know, sort of saying about the issue, the incidents and the cases that they've had. I think maybe we've just got one last question. I think this is our last question we've just had come in there. We could perhaps wrap up with that one. So practically speaking, how effective do you feel the power to take impressions and some samples will be on having a real-term impact on reducing attacks? And do you think that keeping dogs on a lead is enough? Should key stakeholders be encouraging better training of dogs?
So the power to take impressions and samples, real-term impact, I think it will have an impact on the amount of prosecutions that will take place, because there will be more evidence. And as I said earlier, the vast majority of prosecutions that either don't happen or fail is because of the lack of evidence, and lack of evidence that will stack up in court. And having impressions and samples that are taken by the police and done in a proper manner that will be able to be used by the prosecution when they're bringing their case should be very persuasive to a court, and that in turn will raise the profile of prosecutions and potentially act as a deterrent for other people. But in terms of reducing impact immediately, it's not something that will happen immediately. It's something that would have to happen over time as the prosecutions stack up and they become more well known amongst the community. In terms of keeping a dog on a lead and training, yes, I think for the vast majority of any offence that happens in the countryside is generally to do with the ignorance of the members of the public who don't understand farming and countryside and livestock. And so education for me is something that I think could have the best impact for preventing livestock worrying generally, is to make sure that everyone understands what you should do when you have a dog amongst livestock, and what you can do to train your dog. But the essential message to every dog owner should be they should keep their dog on the lead around livestock, and you shouldn't get between a calf and its mother in a field, for instance. There's many very basic things that we know as farmers that the general public don't know that they should know, and education is key.
Okay. Thanks, Rebecca. And we have had a few more questions come in, but we are very quickly running out of time, I'm afraid. We just had the hour slot for today's session. So we will look at those questions and through your registration for the webinar today, we have got your email addresses. So we will try our best to come back to you with an answer to those questions we haven't got to in this session. But I would like to thank Tim and Rebecca for their time today, and thank you to all of us for joining us as well. Tim and Rebecca from Roythornes, they've sponsored this webinar for us, which we're very grateful for. They also sponsor our Breakfast Club series of webinars, which, you know, I think it attracted lots of very interesting speakers and some great debates. So we'd encourage you to take a look at those on the website as well. On the issue of sheep worrying, you know, it's an emotive one, rightly so. You know, if you've ever been affected by it, myself I have as well, and you know, we sympathise in it. It is a horrible issue, and NSA very much are committed to doing all they can to try and get the best resolution, or the best sort of situation for sheep farmers moving forward on this. A reminder, if you are an NSA member, you are entitled to 30 minutes free legal helpline advice with Roythornes, and we've popped the number up there for you if you wanted that, or please just give us a call at NSA head office to give you some more information on that. I think that is all we really have to cover then this afternoon. Just one point, we will be launching our annual survey on sheep worrying next spring. If it's an issue you've been affected by yourself, please do complete that survey, because again, it helps us get word out. It's all part of education, as Rebecca was saying, on the seriousness of this issue, and so the more people that answer it and get involved, the better. But thank you very much, everybody, and I wish you a good afternoon, and we'll see you again.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Bye.